Frank Mitchell was 74 years old and had been running Mitchell's Barber Shop in downtown Riverside, California, for over 4 decades. The faded sign in his window read, Mitchell's Barber Shop, serving since 1979. Inside, there was an old-style barber chair, black and white photographs on the walls, and an ancient radio that always played in the corner. Every morning at 7 a.m., he'd unlock the door. Every evening at 7 p.m., he'd flip the sign to closed. His customers were mostly older men, retired workers, former shop owners, neighborhood boys who'd grown into men. Frank was quiet, didn't talk much, but always wore a gentle smile. When he cut hair, he never rushed, always chatted with his customers, and offered them coffee from his old pot. Nobody knew his story, only the local VFW post commander and a few old friends who occasionally stopped by. Frank Mitchell had served in Vietnam, later in Special Forces, and had done multiple tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. But he never talked about it. The past stays in the past, he'd say. There were no medals on his shop walls, no military photographs displayed. Just in the corner, barely visible, sat a wooden frame with a photo of a young soldier in dress blues. Most customers never even noticed it. That Tuesday afternoon, around 3 p.m., a young man walked into the shop. Mid-20s, expensive clothes, latest iPhone in his hand. His hair was long and he needed a cut. How long does this take? He asked, before even sitting in the chair. No need to rush, son. We'll get you looking sharp, Frank said, preparing his tools. The young man looked annoyed. Look, I'm in a hurry, man. Can you just do something quick? Frank smiled. You'll get the best cut you've ever had, don't worry. As Frank began working, the young man's impatience grew. He kept checking his phone, constantly looking at his watch. Frank worked with his usual steady, careful pace. Dude, seriously. This is taking forever. Modern barbers finish this in 15 minutes, the young man said irritably. Good work takes time, son, Frank replied calmly. Are you having vision problems or something? Your hands are shaking, the young man added, staring at Frank through the mirror. Frank's hands were indeed trembling. Not from age, but from anger. Still, he tried to stay calm. The young man continued. How old are you anyway? Like 75? Isn't it kind of risky getting a haircut from someone that old? Frank stopped the clippers. Son, where are you from? What does that matter? Just finish my hair so I can get out of here. Did you serve in the military? The young man laughed. Military? Hell no. Why would I waste years of my life when I could be building my career? Those words hit Frank like a punch to the gut. But he kept his composure. Fair enough, he said quietly. I bet you never served either, old man. You probably got some cushy deferment back in the day. Frank paused. I served. What? Like 2 years? It was probably easy back then anyway. Not like today's world where everything's competitive and difficult. While scrolling through his phone, the young man continued. Your generation had it made. Government handed out jobs, guaranteed pensions. Now we have to fight for everything ourselves. Frank's patience was wearing thin, but he held it together. You're right, son. Your generation works harder, he said. Exactly. My generation doesn't expect handouts. We make our own way. But you old-timers are always complaining about how things used to be better. After that comment, Frank set down his clippers. Son, your haircut's done. What? You barely started. You're right, I'm too old for this work. Go find yourself a modern barber. The young man stood up. Finally, I told you from the start. Getting a haircut from someone your age was a mistake. As he removed the cape, he added, Seriously, isn't it time to retire, Pops? Make room for the younger generation. Frank quietly began cleaning his station. Walking toward the door, the young man threw out one last insult. And talking about military service like you were some kind of war hero or something. The door slammed shut. Frank sat down in his chair. At 74, he'd never felt so tired. He turned on the radio, poured himself coffee, and looked at the photo in the corner. The picture of him as a young Marine. At 4 p.m., his phone rang. Frank, this is Colonel Martinez. Can I stop by tomorrow at 2? We have something important to discuss. Of course, Miguel. I'll be here. The next afternoon, a man in full military dress uniform entered the shop. Colonel Miguel Martinez, Frank's old unit commander, now stationed at Camp Pendleton. Sergeant Major, the colonel said, extending his hand. Cut that out, Miguel, Frank replied. I'm just a barber now. Never, sir. You'll always be my Sergeant Major. The colonel continued. Sir, we have an invitation from the Pentagon. It's for the 50th anniversary commemoration of your actions in Vietnam. They specifically requested you. Miguel, I'm done with all that. I won't go. Sergeant Major, they're making a documentary about you. How you single-handedly saved those 12 Marines. How you carried them out under fire. Frank remained silent. Please, sir. Young Marines need to hear your story. Just then, yesterday's customer was walking past the shop. He'd been thinking about coming back to finish his haircut. Looking through the window, he saw a uniformed colonel shaking hands respectfully with the old barber. Confused, he decided to enter. Excuse me, he said, looking at the colonel. My haircut was unfinished yesterday. The colonel turned to him. Who are you? I came here for a haircut yesterday. Frank looked at the colonel. Miguel, this young man came yesterday. He was in a hurry, so he didn't finish. The colonel studied the young man carefully. How did you speak to Sergeant Major Mitchell? What do you mean? What did you say to him yesterday? The young man felt uncomfortable. I just came for a haircut. The colonel turned to Frank. Sergeant Major, does this young man know who you are? He doesn't need to know, Miguel. Yes, he does, sir. Yes, he does. The colonel faced the young man. Do you know who this man is? A barber. This man is Sergeant Major Frank Mitchell, Medal of Honor recipient. In Vietnam, he single-handedly held off an entire NVA regiment to evacuate 12 wounded Marines. He was shot 4 times, but refused medical attention until every Marine was safe. The young man's face went pale. This man served 6 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. He's taken more enemy fire than most people see in movies. He saved more American lives than we can count. The colonel continued. This man put his life on the line so you could walk free in this country. What did you say to him yesterday? The young man couldn't speak. You mocked his age, didn't you? Told him to retire, didn't you? At that moment, the door opened and 2 more Marines entered. Then another officer. Word had spread. Sergeant Major, they said, standing at attention. The young man didn't understand what was happening. The colonel turned back to him. If you counted this man's medals, it would take all day. But he doesn't display them, because he's a real warrior. Real warriors don't brag. They serve. Frank stood up. Miguel, that's enough. No, sir. This young man needs to understand. He turned to the young man. You said you never served, didn't you? This man served 30 years. You said his generation had it easy, didn't you? This man went to war, lost friends, carried their bodies home. The young man's eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry, he whispered. Frank approached him. Son, you're not a bad person. You just didn't know. But learn this. Be careful how you speak to older folks. Every old man carries a story, and some stories were written so you could be free. The young man was crying now. Would you finish my haircut? He asked, with a trembling voice. Frank smiled. Of course, son. This time we won't rush. As he sat in the chair, the young man asked, Are you really a hero? No, son. I just did my job. The real heroes never came home. From that day forward, the young man came every week, not just for haircuts, but to listen to stories. And Frank, for the first time, began sharing his memories. Because some stories aren't meant to be told. They're meant to be passed on. If this story moved you, please like and share it. Tell us in the comments about the silent heroes you know. Because in every neighborhood there's a Frank Mitchell. But we don't always notice.